Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessikah. I am your host today, and I am here with one of my favorite authors who's written some of my favorite books, like Near the Bone and the Ghost Tree. And we're here to talk about Good Girls Don't Die, which is extremely different than both of those books, but also a really good read. So welcome, Christina Henry.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you back. So why don't we talk a little bit about Good Girls Don't Die and sort of, in your words, like what it's about and then where it came from, because it was really interesting.
What is this book about? That is the question. I would say it's about three women who are trapped in stories that they know that aren't their own. But I think this is a tough book to talk about because any discussion of it is a spoiler almost. And even when I wrote the book was inspired by my pandemic reading. Basically, during the pandemic, I was at home like everybody else, and I was reading a lot of cozy mysteries for comfort. And I had a kind of idea like, oh, I could write a cozy mystery. And I started writing, and almost immediately the book took a left turn, which is something that happens to me all the time. And it became something else completely different, but it does have some mystery elements to it, amongst other things. But when I sent it to my agent, I said, I can't tell you what it's about, just read it. And then she sent it to my editor and she said, I can't tell you what it's about, just read it. So I hope people don't try to find out too much about this book. Like, if you go in fresh, I think that's the best thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, because now I'm trying to think about how I can possibly talk about the book without spoiling it. But I think let's talk, instead of doing that. So you mentioned there's three women, they're trapped in stories they know that are not their own. There's Celia, there's Allie, and there's Maggie. And on the very surface, I think like a good way to kind of talk about the book without spoiling it is to talk about the tropes that it works with, because we already know that these women are in these stories and they know that this is not their actual lives 100%. So, with Celia, it is a cozy mystery trope. With Allie, it's a slasher film trope. And with Maggie, it's almost like a Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Squid Game type trope.
Yeah, like a dystopia.
Exactly. Dystopia, where she needs to compete against other people and, I don't know, go through some sort of trial.
Obstacles. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, again, because we don't want to give anything away, what is it about these tropes that made you, I mean, the cozy mystery one for sure, I totally get that. That was your comfort read during the pandemic. But what about the slasher flick and also the dystopian trial trope drew you to wanting to put those in this particular story without giving too much away?
Yeah, so what ended up happening was I wrote Celia's section, and then I kind of came to a point where I was like, I don't know if there's enough for one whole book just on this one character. So I had to make a decision, and I thought it would be fun to explore other tropes. And I kind of considered and discarded different ones. But I think the progression of the stories, the way they're set up in the book, escalates the story by virtue of what each woman has to go through. So part of it was there's a cozy mystery, which isn't too intense, right? And then a slasher is more intense. And then like a dystopic situation where you have to like literally run for your life, is even more intense. So it was really, I think, ultimately the decision was about building intensity in the story and making it, um, increase with each section.
Yeah, that's true. I could definitely see that. And there is sort of an escalation, I guess, of urgency. Definitely between cozy mystery and the slasher mystery. With the cozy mystery, you have like that safety almost, but the mystery part, or what's going on with Celia, is a little bit more interpersonal, and I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the story for the slasher obviously is going to get bloody, but there's also an interpersonal aspect of that as well. And then when you get to Maggie's story, she's dropped in this situation with people she definitely doesn't know, but the stakes are high because someone she cares about is in danger off screen. So it's kind of a really interesting way to look at how people would sort of, I guess, react if they're put in these situations. I think another thing that I kind of want to talk about without, kind of talk around, I suppose, is
Right.
the mixed media that you use, because there's the story of what's going on, and then there's kind of some background stuff that sort of deconstructs the stories. It was really fun to kind of cross-reference what was going on the page with that. And I really love it when authors do that. How did you kind of come to that as an idea to tell the story?
Um, it was a way to connect all three characters, via these kind of online conversations that they'd have had and their interactions with certain people. Um, and I think that, it's also, I think it's very difficult now it's not impossible, obviously, but I think it's hard to write certain kinds of stories without an acknowledgement of and an awareness of all the media that we consume. I think it's tough sometimes to be like, well, here goes this person into a haunted house, and clearly they've never seen a haunted house movie in their life. I think it's very, very difficult sometimes to write a story without acknowledging that, like, we have all this media around us. We have, you know, uh, there's Reddit threads, there's, Twitter, or what used to be known as Twitter. There's all these places where we interact and we discuss these kinds of things, these story tropes. So I think it's, almost important to acknowledge that these kinds of things exist.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think like one of the things I really liked about the Ghost Tree in particular, because that was like set like before the technology that connected us, and that kind of made it a little bit easier. And I do recall like years and years ago having a conversation with somebody. We were watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they were saying, this story would have been very different if someone could just call Willow and be like, Willow, something, you don't talk to so and so, something's going on.
Right.
But we are in we are really living in like a metaverse at this point. I mean, all these things have been done. And if you're a consumer of this stuff, you know how it goes. I think like honestly, the first horror piece that I remember really playing with that was Scream, the original, where it's like, okay, so here are the rules if you're in a horror movie. And I think like after that, it was impossible to read or watch any media without thinking about that stuff. So it does make it hard. You're right. And I think you kind of did it in a really fun and clever way. And one of the things I loved, and again, this is trying very hard not to spoil it, is that it does set an atmosphere outside of the narrative that's happening in front of the three main characters. And I feel like that is a very difficult task to do. And you definitely pulled it off really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously all three stories are connected, and I don't know. I'll say that my agent, my editor, my UK editor, like nobody in publishing who read this figured out where it was going before the end. So I don't necessarily think people will like hook it all together, but I think they will start to suspect there's something larger at work, and I'm hoping that those conversations at the beginning of each chapter will start to lay in clues for people of kind of how they're all connected.
So are you a fan of all three genres?
Yeah, I mean, I read everything. I don't discriminate. I watch a ton of horror movies. In fact, when we when we logged on, I was looking for like a copy of The Wicker Man because there's a 50th anniversary Blu-ray out. Um,
Wait,
and
you mean the original one with
yes, yes,
yeah,
it with
the
Christopher Lee.
original one.
Yes, not the Nicolas Cage one. I'm a fan of Nicolas Cage, but not that movie. Um, but I love horror movies. I love cozy mysteries. I have read a lot of dystopic novels. I read everything, and I like to watch everything. I just like to take it all in. And in some ways, for me, too, those were sort of the three easiest to kind of deconstruct because they have really, really specific tropes that apply in every single case. Whereas like science fiction is so broad, it's hard to say, oh, well, I'm going to write science fiction tropes. Well, you'd have to like narrow it down to a subgenre, which may be less recognizable, you know. But cozy mysteries, like there's just a way that cozy mysteries work. And that was one of the reasons why I started thinking I could write one because I was reading all of them and my brain was just deconstructing them. Like you have this, you have that, you have this small town, you have a an amateur detective, usually you have recipes, there's like a way that cozy mysteries work. That if you read them because you want that. You want them to function that way for you every single time.
For sure. And there are definitely ways that slasher flicks and dystopian novels work too, but
Hmm.
they I see what, they're a little bit less safe than cozy
Hmm.
mysteries.
Yeah.
Um, no matter what you think the rules are. So no, that's definitely true. I almost feel like if we talk about the title, it's a bit of a it's gonna get too into the weeds. But tell me a little bit about where the title came from, specifically.
Well, okay. So this is not just getting into the weeds. This is like how the sausage gets made. So the original title of this book was not Good Girls Don't Die. And actually, if you followed me on my social media and you saw the Publishers Marketplace announcement, you would know the book used to be called Prove It, which is actually a phrase that is repeated multiple times in this book and is actually very important in the book. But this is a thing where authors have no control. The salespeople and the marketing people were like, we don't know how to sell this. We don't like this title. The senior editorial team didn't like the title. So then they're like, we really want a title that says more about what the book is. And then we went through, I don't know, 6 weeks, 75, 80 different titles, coming up with different things. My agent made suggestions, I made suggestions, my editor made suggestions, and everything is like we're just trying to narrow it down to something that's sort of acceptable to everybody. And then I was out running and I was listening to the Church's song Good Girls, and I was like, why don't we just call it Good Girls Don't Die?
I love
And that
it. I love it so much. I love when people come up with ideas while moving.
mhm.
Something about that is just so relatable, especially as somebody who likes to move and listen to music. I mean, like that is by far one of that's when the juices start to flow in my head and I start to get ideas for things. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, but it was really a process. The cover was a process. I think because of the very thing that we were talking about, where like there's three different genres in this book. It's hard to describe, and just the fact of the business is that if a thing is hard to describe, then it's hard to market. And sales teams want to be able to sell your book. So it was definitely a little bit of a challenge, but it's a kind of book that I'm hoping people will read and say to their friends, I don't want to tell you anything about it, but I think you'll like it. So, basically what I said to my agent, just read it.
Well, thank you so much. This was super fun. And again, it's like it's tough because I'm just like, oh, more things to talk about, but also don't want to give any of it away. So I'll ask you, are you working on something else at the moment?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on two new books. I have a book that's already been edited and actually even has the cover and everything's ready to go. That will be out in the spring. It's called The House That Horror Built, and it's about a house cleaner who cleans house for like a very reclusive horror director who has secrets in his past. I like to say I'm moving out of my haunted forest phase and into my haunted buildings phase because a lot of my past books have like creepy forests in them. But now I seem to be moving away from that and into, built places. So that'll be out in the spring. And then I'm working on two other things right now that are just sort of starting the process of.
That sounds fabulous. I totally would love to have you back to talk about that one.
That one
Everything
will be a
about that
little
sounds great.
that'll be a little easier to talk about than this one.
Well, thanks again, Christina Henry. This was super. Please come back in the spring
Absolutely.
and read Good Girls Don't Die. And then like, can we say tweet at people still? Like, I refuse to call it anything else.
You could post about it, right? You could post
Post about it.
different
Yes.
places. Yes.
Post about it. And don't give spoilers away, but just be, your reactions, even if it's several exclamation points.
hmm I expect a range of emotions with this book. I really do. So, but I hope that people kind of get what I was going for.
Thank you so much. Once again, this was Jessikah with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was Christina Henry, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.